Good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit more about some of my experiences in working in mental health and why I ultimately left the mental health field. Before starting, I do want to start off by saying that this video is not intended to insult, bash, or criticize in a harmful way anybody who works in the mental health care field, whether it be administrative, whether it's counselors, clinicians, therapists, psychiatrists, supervisors, anything like that. And it is not intended to prevent anybody from seeking mental health treatment. My intention behind making this video is to talk a little bit about my personal experiences and what worked for me and what didn't, and why I felt like leaving the profession and leaving the career that I thought was meant for me was ultimately in my highest good, and how it led to more growth and more development for me in different areas of my life, particularly my career. So I want to start off by saying that I decided I wanted to be a therapist when I was very young. Possibly around 12 was when I first remember having thoughts that when I grow up, I want to become a therapist. At that time, I was seeking therapy myself. I had trichotillomania, which is the hair pulling disorder. I had a lot of anxiety and a little bit of depression. There were a lot of family of origin issues, and I was bullied a lot at school. I always felt like I didn't fit in. I had a very low self-esteem starting at a very early age, and naturally my body responded to that, and hair pulling was the first thing that I used to cope. Let me backtrack and say that actually eating was the first thing that I would use to cope. Binge eating, overeating, eating for comfort, everything like that. And then around 11 was when I started pulling my hair. At the time, there wasn't a lot of understanding about this condition, and there was a lot of that belief that I'm crazy, I'm bad, I'm not good enough, you have to keep this a secret. That was one of the worst parts about it. There was just so much shame and secrecy around it that I felt like I couldn't be myself. I felt like I had to hide what I was experiencing, and I felt like I had to hide a part of who I am. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more either in this video or another video about how different experiences and different diagnoses can actually shape our identity and the way we view ourselves and our self-concept. But I do want to clarify that I have come to peace with my past, with my hair pulling, with that part of me, and I have accepted that aspect of myself with love and with compassion, understanding, patience, and kindness. And it took me a long time to get to that point. But I digress. So, when I finished high school, went to a university, studied psychology, minored in sociology as well. Then I went on to get my master's in social work. During my social work degree at the university, I started developing a drinking problem. During that, I realized that I needed to really get some help myself. I realized that I needed to actually get good therapy, but I myself did not have good therapy up until that point. There were a mix of reasons for that, one being that I just didn't have therapists that were a good fit for me, one being that there were barriers financially to me getting good therapy around that time. I mean, I was working like a little part-time job, primarily in grad school. I didn't have a whole lot of money to pay the co-pays and everything. And so it was just a lot. And there was also a lot of times where I knew that okay, I probably need something different, but I didn't want to go through the whole process of it. It was overwhelming and it was daunting, and I was already going through a lot in grad school and other things in my life, that going through the process of finding a different therapist was just something that I did not personally think I could take on at the time. And that was just where I was at the time. Looking back on it, of course, I could see that there were a couple of things that I could have done differently, but that was what happened. So eventually I finished grad school, took a few months off just to get a few things in check to make sure that I had like a solid foundation in not drinking, and more of like a foundation in like taking like good care of myself, going on walks, meditating, trying to do some self-care, developing a more of a support network and like hobbies and things to do like that. But eventually I did realize that I needed to get therapy again myself. And I was connected with somebody who I had met when I was in grad school at one of the organizations I was part of. And he took me on as his client. And it was probably the best experience that I had for therapy so far. You know, that was probably the only therapist up until that point that I was able to actually open up to, and who I actually felt safe around, and who I felt like I could share honestly like what was going on in my mind and my heart, what I wanted, what I needed, things I struggled with, things I was ashamed of, and never once did I feel ashamed by him like I had previously by other clinicians. Now, at this time, too, I was in the process of licensure to become a licensed clinical social worker. I was working in community based organizations like most people at that point in their career, most clinicians at that point in their career start off with, and it was a lot. It honestly was overwhelming for anybody. For me, for most people I know, there's a lot of truth to the fact that there is a high turnover rate in a lot of community based organizations. And there is a lot of administrative work you have to do. There are heavy caseloads that you have to do. You're dealing with very difficult and emotionally taxing situations. Some of these environments, too, there's so much more to it than just like a typical, like, clock in, clock out, or like have a session and have like your sessions, run your groups and everything like that. Like, there's a lot of day-to-day type of things that you have to do and you have to face and you have to deal with, and it wasn't something I was interested in being part of. I didn't become a therapist to do those types of things. I became a therapist because I actually wanted to have the experience of working with clients individually, working through the problems, providing those resources, providing that support, creating the dialogue, and creating that space to actually like share and process everything that was needed for them at the time. That was what I actually wanted to do. And of course, I did get to do that. You know, sometimes you don't mix with certain clients. Sometimes you're simply just not a good fit, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's not always them, it's not always me. Sometimes it's simply we're just not a good fit. But all of the things, the additional things that came with the profession just created burnout. It started to become very difficult to actually show up for the aspects of being a therapist that I actually enjoyed, or I should realistically say being a counselor or a clinician, given the fact I was never independently licensed as an LCSW. And that is just more of an administrative or something that the field recommends. I couldn't even tell you, honestly, don't care about the specifics of it, to be very blunt. I was so burnt out by the end of it. I had tried different organizations, tried different types of settings, but it was all just the same thing with like a different face. And I got to the point where I no longer had the bandwidth or the desire to work in the field anymore. I personally couldn't do it anymore. I felt like I was just living this life that was not mine. I felt like I was just spending so much of my time and energy on things that I didn't want to do because that was what the job demanded. And I just felt like I didn't have purpose. I felt like I didn't really have direction, and it was hard to find meaning in that kind of setting, in that kind of work. which was what I was looking for all along. That was what I wanted. It felt meaningful. I enjoyed the aspects of the therapy that I enjoyed, but all of the other things got in the way of that and made it very difficult to actually be able to show up for that. Some people are able to put that aside or get through it, or they're able to deal with it. More often than not, most clinicians that I know who have worked in the types of settings that I've worked in have also experienced the same thing and eventually left the profession. Unfortunately, there is a very staggering number of clinicians that leave the profession very early into their career because of these types of issues. And for a long time, I felt like I was alone. I felt so ashamed at first of leaving the profession. I felt like I was a failure. I felt like I was so flawed. I felt like I was just not good enough, that I wasn't worthwhile. I had so much negative self-talk and inner dialogue. And I remember working one day. I was scheduled to work. I had to call out because I couldn't even get out of bed in the morning, because I was so depressed and so just exhausted and drained emotionally, physically, spiritually, everything. And I remember just having to tell my supervisor at the time that I can't do this anymore and that I apologized for having to quit on such short notice. I had only been working in this specific place for about a month, and I just told her that I do not have the bandwidth to do it right now. And it was hard. I did get some people in my support system helping me through that time, and I needed a particular person in my support system at that time to kind of give me the permission to do that. I really needed that because I had known for a long time that this wasn't working. I had known for a long time, when I was really honest with myself, that this wasn't really something that I wanted to do. And I felt so unsure of the whole situation and unsure of myself and everything. But I was so afraid of making a change. I was so afraid of being seen as a failure or weak or being seen as deficient in any way. I felt like because I had committed up to this point to do it, that I need to continue to do it. I felt like I was obligated to myself and to other people to do it and to prove myself to other people. And it got to a point too where I had to start realizing how much of my identity and my self-concept was so wrapped in the career that I was in, and how I felt like that was really the only thing that was going for me. That was the only thing that I had of value, that was worthwhile. And when I left, when I finally gave myself that permission to leave, it was one of the worst emotional bottoms and depressions I had ever had in my life. I don't remember ever feeling that unstable, for lack of a better word. It was very disorienting and destabilizing to leave. I did leave without a backup. Whether that was good or bad, I'm not sure, but today I do not regret it. It was very painful leaving and not having a backup. At this point, I had moved out of my family's house and had to then move back in because I did not have a source of income coming in. So that was an additional feeling of failure, an additional feeling of not being good, and feeling like I was always going to be in this cycle of always being dissatisfied or just not feeling like I was actually getting to achieve the things that I wanted for myself. And for about 2 months, I was in a pretty dark headspace. And that was another reason why I moved back in. I didn't even look for work. I was physically and mentally not really in a place to be working anywhere. For a while, I needed to really just rest, and I really needed to just take better care of myself and really lean into the support system that I had and strengthen that support system that I had. Some may argue that if I had gotten a job or something in between, whether it was just a part-time job during those 2 months, maybe it wouldn't have been as difficult. I can't really say. I don't know, because that's not what happened. Maybe it would have. But I remember in those 2 months, there was a lot of suicidal thoughts that I was having, even before that. Even when I was working as a counselor, there were a lot of mornings I woke up feeling sentenced to another day of life, so to say, and felt like I just didn't want to live. I had talked to my therapist about it. I personally had to use the 988 Lifeline number a couple of times. I had to share about it with my support system. And I was doing all the things that I knew I needed to do. I was looking for the reasons to live, looking at the reasons I wanted to die, and everything. Like, I used the knowledge that I had as a counselor with these types of situations and used it on myself. And it was very difficult showing up to work and feeling like, who am I to be a therapist? Who am I to be a counselor if this is where my headspace is at? And looking back on it, it's true. Yes, counselors have lived experiences, and yes, counselors can share those experiences and use self-disclosure when appropriate is what we're taught. Yes, those experiences can have value in the long run, but at the end of the day, truly, you cannot pour from an empty cup. I had to come first. My health, my mental health, my physical health, my spiritual health had to come before a job. And it was to the point where I felt like it was unethical for me to continue counseling people when I myself was really struggling with my own mental health. And I was that burnt out and that unhappy and that depressed, and that was where I was at. So I left, came back home, leaned into my support system, did a complete different career transition, more towards environmental work and outdoor spaces. And it was the best thing for me. There was still so much uncertainty. There was still so much like, what am I going to be doing for my career? What am I going to be doing with my life? Like, what is this going to look like? But this is when I really started having to trust the universe, my higher power, my source, God. I use any number of those names to describe the divine. And I see now that it was the best thing for me to leave the profession. I can see now that my life is much better. The quality of my life is much better than it was a couple of years ago. I do not at all regret today leaving the profession. Looking back on it, I genuinely think if I could do anything differently, ultimately I would have left sooner. I took the advice of supervisors that I had to really try and to really stick it out and to really do it. And I do believe that they meant well. I don't believe they meant anything malicious or harmful towards me. But that advice was not best for me. And I was not yet in a place where I felt like I could trust myself and trust my decisions. I was still always looking to somebody else to give me the answers. I was still always looking towards somebody else to tell me what I needed to do. And the reality is, there's a mix of the two of them that I need to do to form good decisions. Meaning, it's okay for me to look towards a mentor or somebody who has something that I respect, has a quality of life, a quality of being that I admire. And ultimately, I have to look within myself. What does my intuition tell me? What is God telling me to do right now? What genuinely feels best for me in my highest good? What is my higher self telling me right now? What would my higher self do? What would a person who loves themselves do? Those were the types of questions that I was not actively asking myself. I did a little bit here and there, but I wasn't firmly grounded in those concepts just yet. And after leaving the profession, those types of questions, like what would I want to do? What does my higher self tell me to do? What does God want me to do? Became more of a working part of my mind. Became more something that I look towards, something that I implement into my life. Because ultimately, when I trust my intuition and I genuinely know that this is my intuition rather than my mind creating some kind of story or narrative or reasoning and logic and analytical thinking and everything like that, when I genuinely know that something is my intuition, more often than not, I am not wrong. I don't think there's ever been a time where I trusted my gut and anything bad happened. Bad, quote unquote. So, what it's like today. I have a job I enjoy. I have a job that is far less stressful. I have a job that actually does still feel meaningful. Will it be the job that I'm at for the rest of my life? Who knows? I think the divine will decide that, along with my choices and free will, of course. Mentally, I'm in a place far better than anything I've had before. I love and respect and value myself more, and I've had to work a lot on my self-concept and my self-esteem and my self-worth to see that I am a lovable and worthwhile person, and that I have value, and that I have so many beautiful things to offer, and that I have skills and I have talents, and I have a voice, I have a mind, I have intellect, I have intuition, I have a community, I have a support system, I have people who absolutely love me and are so excited to see me when I come into the room. I have people who genuinely care about me and want the best for me. I have people who will share their experiences with me, who will share some feedback with me, who will give me some suggestions, but they ultimately respect my free will and respect my decision to make my own decisions. I have healthier relationships today. I have a healthier relationship with people who I work with my family, with friends, and ultimately with myself and with the divine. Through this, my spirituality, my spiritual growth, my spiritual development, my journey has looked a little bit different than it was a few years ago, meaning different practices are being used, different concepts are being implemented, I'm learning different things, I'm learning new things, and that is ultimately the most exciting part about it, seeing all the things that I'm learning and how I'm growing and how I'm implementing these into my life and seeing how it goes. The future is always uncertain, meaning I don't know what the future is going to look like 100%. I can have an idea of my goals and what I want to create for my life, but ultimately I do not know what the path is going to look like, what kind of bridge of incidents there are going to be in my life in creating the life that I want. But today I'm in a much better and healthier space and trust that wherever I'm at is exactly where I'm meant to be. And I can genuinely say that rather than just understand it as a concept. Today, I genuinely believe that right now is exactly where I'm meant to be. And that if I continue on the path that I'm on, if I continue to seek, I will find those answers. If I continue to grow, I will continue to get better, stronger, wiser, stepping more into the person that I was created to become, stepping more into the higher version of myself, closing the gap between the person who I am now and the person I want to be, getting closer to that. And I did all of that through a series of trial and error, a series of finding what didn't work, a series of making mistakes, a series, there's so many ways you can view the term making mistakes, like do we actually make mistakes, but that's for another video. But there is so much that I've learned, and ultimately it has been one of the most beautiful and most rewarding things for me that 2 years ago when I was in the mix and the mutt of it, it was very hard to envision myself being where I am today. It felt completely out of reach. It felt like it was going to be impossible for me to actually be able to be happy again, to actually be able to have any kind of self-love or self-respect. It felt impossible to have healthy and loving relationships. It felt impossible to actually be able to use the healing that I use today. It felt impossible to actually be able to do the things that I want to do today that I didn't think were possible for me before. So, my hope is that this video has reached at least one person who can relate, whether it is someone who is in the middle of a job transition, a career transition or change, whether it's somebody who's currently unsatisfied in some area of their life, but they're just afraid to take that leap of faith, whether it is somebody who's unsure of themselves and doesn't trust their intuition and is always looking to somebody for the answers. Anything that applied to you in this video, anything that resonated, anything that felt like it made sense or felt familiar, my hope is that you were able to take something from this and use it for yourself, and to really reflect on what changes you need to make or what things you might need to do differently. Today, I believe that life truly is a journey, not a destination. I was so absorbed in thinking that once I get this, then I'll be happy. Once this happens, then I'll be okay. I have arrived. But the reality is, some of the things that I now have are just a normal part of my life. Some of the things that I once thought were so out of reach for myself are now just me. This is me as the higher version of myself. This is me as a more mature, more wise, more grown person than myself a few years ago. And I do believe that it is ultimately a very rewarding and exciting way of living. I don't want to ramble anymore. I think I've covered everything that I wanted to cover for this video. If you liked this video, like, share, and subscribe to my channel. If you liked this video, consider it. Rewatch it if needed. Really absorb the concepts talked about, anything that resonated with you. And with that, I hope you have a beautiful day.